Hello, I'm Shane Smith, Director of Programming for Hot Docs. Thank you for joining us for this special live conversation for the film Made You Look, a true story about fake art, part of the Big Ideas program sponsored by Scotia Wealth Management. We would like to acknowledge the diversity of the First Peoples of the territory on which the festival takes place and honor the stewardship of the Mississaugas of the New Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Iroquois, Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat. We're grateful to have the opportunity to live on this territory. The format for this event is a hosted conversation with audience questions. You can ask questions by typing them into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. This webinar is being closed captioned by AI Media. If you need closed captioning, you can turn it on in your Zoom app. Made You Look, a true story about fake art, examines the controversy that erupts when the American art market is flooded with a slew of fake paintings valued in the millions. As the truth unravels and consequences mount, a reputed New York dealer unwittingly finds herself at the center of an elaborate con. It's a fascinating film, raises a lot of issues about the art world. And to discuss those issues, I'd like to introduce the esteemed panel that has joined us today. I'll start with Barry Avrich, the director of the film. Barry has produced and directed over 30 documentary films and television productions that have been broadcast in over 100 countries and won awards and critical acclaim. His films are provocative and fascinating, and many of them have played at Hot Docs over the years. Patty Cohen covers the national economy for the New York Times and is the author of In Our Prime, The Fascinating History and Promising Future of Middle Age. She's an award-winning reporter, having written extensively about ideas, books, and the arts, and worked as an investigative reporter in the culture department at the Times. Maria Konnikova is the author of two New York Times bestsellers, The Confidence Game and Mastermind, How to Think Like Sherlock Holmes. Her new book, The Biggest Bluff, will be released later this month. While researching The Biggest Bluff, Maria became an international poker champion and the winner of over $300,000 in tournament earnings, and inadvertently turned into a professional poker player. Her Twitter bio says she's the only New Yorker writer ever to go on leave to play pro poker. And finally, Don Thompson is an economist and emeritus professor in the Schulich School of Business at York University in Toronto. He's also taught at Harvard Business School and the London School of Economics. He's the author of 12 books, including the best-selling The $12 Million Stuffed Shark, The Curious Economics of Contemporary Art. His most recent book on the art world is The Orange Balloon Dog, Bubbles, Turmoil, and Avarice in the Contemporary Art Market. We've got a lot of great experts with us to talk about this film. Thank you all so much for joining us. It's great to have you here. Let's get into it. Barry, I want to start just by setting up the film itself, how you came to learn about the story that is the subject of the film, and what made you decide to make a film about it.
Thank you, Shane, and thrilled to be part of Hot Docs. A couple of years ago, I had made a film about the contemporary art world called Blurred Lines that looked at how the art world worked. And after making that film, I didn't think I'd be spending any more time in the art world. I don't know if they wanted me back in it. I certainly love to collect art and I'm passionate about it. And then a collector brought me this story and I was immediately smitten, primarily because the characters are so Hollywood driven and fascinating to me. This had a catch me if you can feel to it. And I immediately wanted to make this film.
And Patty, you wrote about the story in the New York Times. You kind of broke the story. In a way, tell us how you became aware of it and how long you spent pulling together your articles for the story.
Oh, thanks. And also, this is great to be a part of this forum. I basically had a tip from a source, and this was before the gallery, the Knoedler Gallery, closed, about that there was an FBI investigation going on and that there was questionable dealings going on. And I started to dig and dig and dig. And the more I dug, the more bizarre and interesting it became. And I probably spent a couple of years writing about this, certainly as it kind of unfolded and followed along in real time from the moment where we were still all wondering, are these authentic paintings that had suddenly been uncovered, or is there some almost supernaturally talented forger out there who is recreating all of these modernist masters.
And Patty, you've written about art fraud a number of times. What was it about this story that was unique, and what was the hardest part of trying to get to the bottom of it for you as a investigative reporter?
Well, of course, of any story like this, the people who are at the center of it, and in this case, not the victims, but the people who are selling the art, obviously do not want to share information with you. And then you've got, at the same time, because it was an ongoing investigation, the FBI was involved, the Southern District Prosecutor's Office was involved, and they are very reluctant to share information as well. So, it really takes a lot of digging and persistence. But ultimately what happened was the case kind of broke apart in the sense that once the FBI got involved and was able to track some of the bank accounts, they could get the woman who was at the center of it, Glafira Rosales, brought in on charges. And once they had that leverage, they could pressure her to reveal what had happened. And there's still a lot of mysteries about this case that we don't know the answers to.
No, it's true. I think, Barry, you came to the story a few years after it had taken place. So did you find that people might have been a bit more willing to talk by the time you came around, or what challenges did you have trying to get people to appear on camera to talk about this?
Well, it wasn't easy. You have to remember, and I'm sure Patty would agree, and Dawn, that there's a no-win for anybody to sort of talk about this. They're embarrassed by it. Reputations have been lost, whether you're a collector or you're selling the art. So, many felt that they really didn't want to go on camera. What I promised everybody that ultimately did agree was that, pardon the pun, that they would have a huge canvas to tell their entire story versus a soundbite, and that they can really sort of let the audience hear their side of the story. And yes, initially no one agreed to go on camera. It was a challenge, but I knew that, unless you had people like Anne Friedman and Domenico De Sole, a collector, and then of course Carlos Bergantinos all the way in Lugo, Spain, that I really didn't have a film.
You're a convincing man. You got so many of the players in this story on camera. Dawn, I want to go to you for a minute to get your sense of the scope and scale of art fraud as you understand it, and as you've learned about it and written about it when researching your books on the economics of the art world. How big a problem is this?
Well, art forgery has gone on for a very long time. There's a general belief in the art world that 20% of the art in museums will, 2 generations from now, will have a different attribution. It isn't much talked about because, as Barry said, it's embarrassing to buy a fake, to be a museum curator or director who authorizes the purchase of a fake is difficult. It's hard in the career, and so most fakes are eased out. They're taken off the wall, they're put in storage for a while, they disappear, and you hope the story never opens up.
I will add, Shane, that requests to some of the great museums in the world were rebuffed. They really didn't want to talk about that because, again, you can imagine going to MoMA or elsewhere and pointing a finger at a particular piece of art that isn't real, and then that's the end of that. So they would not participate in this film, and no big surprise there.
I mean, there's a beautiful scene in the film where several of the experts that had authenticated the art in various ways are back on camera saying, oh, no, essentially, changing their story or denying what they've done. And I guess reputations are at stake when the stakes are as high as they are and were in this case.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the most amazing things, and I'm sure Patty can talk to that, is when the one trial did go forward and Domenico De Sole and all of the experts that Anne Friedman had relied on came forward to testify that, they had never really either given their name permission, whether they lied or not, whether some that said, I said it was beautiful, I didn't say it was real. And this becomes the bit of this back and forth on the game on that end of it, because their reputations are at stake as well.
Mm, very true. Patty, yeah, were you in the courtroom? What did you learn about the sort of cover-ups, the personal cover-ups that were going on?
Well, the time that court case actually went forward, I think was it, maybe 4 years later or 5 years later, and I actually had switched to covering something else. I did cover the first couple of years, and there was another moment in court when there was a preliminary hearing and Ann Friedman had gotten on the stand, and I had tracked down many of the people. But one point I think is important to make is that, as incredible as a forger you might have, and as a brilliant a con artist might have been there, you don't pull off this kind of multi-million-dollar fraud that went on for 15 years, say, and involved $80 million and a whole slew of artists. It takes a village to put out this con. And when you got into it, you saw a lot of very questionable dealings, not only on the part of the Knoedler Gallery and Ann Friedman, which it's clear to anybody, I think, that they did not follow through on due diligence in any event. We'll never know what's in their minds. But in any case, a lot of the experts, supposedly, who were authenticating the art were also being paid, not necessarily to authenticate it, but to do research or to write a catalog. Some of the dealers who were showing the art were actually playing both sides. They were getting a commission from the gallery, and they were getting a commission from the buyers, which is clearly unethical on its face. So there were a lot of moving parts to this, and a lot of things that happened to convince people and allow this fraud to go on for so long.
I think Patty makes the point, and it's so valid, that it was so great for the art world for this to be real at the end of that. Everybody was profiting on the end of this, even if you weren't connected to the Knoedler Gallery. For there to be a sudden discovery that drove up the price of Pollock's or Rothko's or de Kooning's or Motherwell's was good for the art world. There's a lot of blame to go around in the story. It doesn't fall at the feet of one person.
Right. There was a lot of looking the other way. There was a lot of complicity. There's a lot of lifting of all boats. And Don, just before I get to you, Maria, Don, tell us about that. Why is sort of fake art or art that we don't dig into deeply, why is it good for the art world? What's the upside for authenticating this kind of work?
It isn't fake art is not good for the art world, but discovering fake art is bad for the art world. Interestingly enough, to follow up on what was said, a month before Knoedler closed, the day after the first lawsuit was filed. A month before that, there was a lot of talk in the New York art world about this, and there were people who said, "Oh, so and so has a fake on their wall, and so has a fake on their wall," and clearly, these are wealthy people, right? There's $80 million worth of fraud here. Guests had been in their home and seen a work on their wall and said, "That's not real," but not told them. You don't visit somebody's home and tell them they get fakes on their wall. So also, lots of people other than the owner of the work suspected something was wrong.
Wow, interesting. So this wasn't a story that came out of the blue. It had been the subject of much rumor and scuttlebutt. Patricia, yeah, go ahead.
Shane, I just want to make one point and kind of follow up on something that Don said. A big problem here is that there were several experts who were saying privately and knew that there were fakes that Knoedler had shown in their booths that were up, that were being sold. And they were all, or almost all of them, instructed by lawyers not to say anything because of the fear of getting sued. You can get sued if you authenticate something and it turns out to be false. You can get sued if you don't authenticate something and it is a fake, but the person says, "Hey, you've just, destroyed the value of this incredible painting." And so this is a problem, is that all of the now experts, as well as even that you have all these foundation and trusts for artists, won't even authenticate their own artwork because of fear of litigation. And as a result of this, it went on for years because several different experts of different artists had identified these as fakes, but they were not talking to each other. They were not telling museums, they were not telling collectors, they were not telling each other.
So the rod is kind of deep, but there's also a fear underneath that, a fear of being sued, a fear of legal repercussions. Maria, I want to get to the art of the con. You literally wrote the book on con artists. Break down for us why Graciela was so successful with her con in this case.
Well, I think that something that Patty has mentioned and Don has mentioned and Barry has mentioned, everyone has mentioned so far, is the central reason why all good cons work. It was the art world wanted to believe in it. And Anne Friedman wanted to believe in it. And I think Glafira Rosales was actually brilliant in her casing. She approached the right person. She approached someone who became the first female head of a major gallery, who was at a very kind of strategic turning point in her career where she wanted to make her name. She was hungry. She wanted to prove herself. And you know, Glafira could have gone to a lot of different art galleries, a lot of different places, and I think she cased well. So that's actually the first step of the successful con artist. They picked their victim well. And Anne was primed for this story. She wanted it to be true because it was going to make her name. It was going to make her reputation. It was going to make Anne Friedman a dealer to be reckoned with, a force to be reckoned with. And don't underestimate that motivation. When you see it in someone else, you think, oh, that person just, wants to make their career. When it's happening to you, you're not going to be as objective. When it comes to yourself, you're much more subjective than when it comes to judging other people. So it's easy to judge Anne and to say, oh, come on. But you have to put yourself in her shoes and actually think, wow, oh my God, this wonderful opportunity is coming my way. I can't believe it. I've waited my whole life for this. I started as a secretary and look at me now. This is my chance to shine, to prove what women can do, to prove that I can shine in the art world. So I think that's actually the first thing that Glafira did well. And then she also really listened to Anne and listened to what Anne was telling her. And I'm so glad that Patty followed this story, because I actually, when it was brought to my attention when I was working on the confidence game, I looked at a lot of her articles, and it got me to a lot of different people who talked to me and who eventually would piece together different elements of how kind of the con, psychologically speaking, unraveled. So thank you, Patty. I just want to say that. And you could see the story changing. You could see it mutating over time, because Glafira was listening to Anne and was seeing, oh, these are the things that might potentially be wrong with the story, with the provenance, with these things. Let me fix it. Let me now actually present it in a slightly different way. Let me make it more palatable. Let me kind of quell the red flags before they're red flags. And so I think that this combination of Anne really wanting to believe and Glafira being a very soft touch and actually kind of understanding how to manipulate her created this perfect storm where all of a sudden you have these fake paintings going to market. And I actually think that at the beginning, Anne thought that she was doing a good job because she wanted to believe so much that she wasn't necessarily being as diligent, but she didn't realize it. I actually think that this is a psychological shortcoming that I've seen in so many victims of con artists. When you want to believe, your power to convince yourself is just amazing. We can kill ourselves. We can convince ourselves we've been cursed and actually die. That's happened. That's medically proven. The power of the brain to convince ourselves of things we want to believe in is insane. So I think that Anne at the beginning wanted to believe so much that she overlooked a lot of things and made this whole thing possible. And then it was just a cascade.
Absolutely. Yeah. So what I'm hearing is the art of the con is a two-way street. It's the skill of the con artist in identifying and, studying their mark, but also listening. But it's also our ability to convince ourselves that, we're smart, we're doing the right thing. What are the other skills of the con artists that make us fall for their act?
I think the con artist is a beautiful storyteller. That's their other great skill. And it's something that, to me as a writer, as a journalist, is actually a little bit scary, because you see how a compelling story can make people really overlook a lot of things and overlook logic and kind of say, oh, this is so wonderful, this is so nice. And con artists are very good at telling you the story that you want to hear and building this compelling world that where you fit in and you're an actor. And it's not necessarily, they don't even ask for anything. I think Glafira was very smart also in how she approached Anne. She said, well, it's not that she said, I think this is worth X amount of money. I don't know how much this is worth. You're the expert. Here you go. Let me give it to you and you can evaluate it. If it's not worth anything, I'll take it back. I really have no idea. It's this wonderful thing where it makes it seem like she's not out for money. She's not out to do something. She's just out to show this lovely painting to the world. A lot of con artists do that. They make it so that you're the one doing all the work. And con actually comes from confidence, as in trust. Do you trust me? Do you have confidence in me? And so, yes, it's always a two-way street. And it's trying to figure out, okay, how can I get you to do the dirty work without me actually having to get my own hands dirty? A lot of con artists don't actually commit any crimes. Obviously, in the case of Glafira, she did. But a lot of con artists manage to do everything without crossing any lines. They make their victims do it for them.
It's quite the skill. And we see it in abundance in the film. Barry, you interviewed Jose Carlos Bergantinos. You got him on camera, and he's quite the character. And his approach to the con is very different from Glafira's, which might be why they made allegedly made a great team. Tell us about the experience of connecting with him and being in the room with the man who many believe is the mastermind behind this.
There's no question that he played sort of the back of the house versus the front of the house. I mean, Glafira was better in terms of her interactions with Anne. Carlos Bergantinos is the man with the long rap sheet. He had been involved in previous frauds, including Christie's and others, and was a long-time practitioner of the con on that end of it. Finding him was not easy. He lives in a medieval town called Lugo, Spain. Getting there was the other half of the battle, and certainly convincing him to speak, because again, there was sort of a no-win in him going on camera. He is one slippery character, there's no question. We filmed him at the offices of his lawyers in Lugo. His lawyer, who doesn't speak any English, insisted that Carlos only speak Spanish. Thankfully, the lawyer could not stop smoking and would leave the interview every 22 seconds so I can get the right questions in. But Carlos, of course, deflects all the blame elsewhere. That Glafira was interested in status. She liked fancy purses. She liked a fancy car. She wanted a fancy house. He, of course, is the poor immigrant who came from the restaurant supply business. He didn't know anything of anything. And then 5 minutes later, of course, and Maria can talk to this, his ego gets the best of him, and he has to talk about discovering the great paintings while he's in New York wandering around, and going to the Met, MoMA, and discovering Pei Shen, and he claims he had no relationship with Anne Friedman, but we know that he's deeply involved in telling Glafira what best to sell, what's selling. I mean, if you think about this for a minute, if you thought that you sold the first painting to Anne Friedman and walked away with hundreds of thousands of dollars, wouldn't you get out of town? Some 60 paintings later, they keep going because they really found, the golden goose here, and just kept selling. And of course, Carlos would work with Pei Shen Quinn to find the right frame, the right nails, the right wire, age the work with the right tea leaves. It was insane, but he knew exactly what he was doing. And of course, you see it in the film. He even tries to sell me allegedly Bond's harmonica. He just cannot keep it. He's always working me. And while we were filming, and then when I said to him, what do you make of Glafira's claims that you mentally and physically abused her and manipulated her into doing this? And he goes, well, I understand that she had to say that to get a lenient sentence, but I called these two, and Maria might not agree, but I called these two the Bonnie and Clyde of the art world. They knew how to work together.
Definitely. We're going to get to audience questions in a couple of minutes. If you've got questions for the viewers out there, enter them, type them in the Q&A box below, and we will get to them soon. Maria, I'm going to come back to you on the con artists and the type of bluster and style that Jose Carlos Bergantinos demonstrated. This seems like a bit of a tell for a con artist. What are the tells? What should we be looking for so that we don't fall for the art of the con?
You know, I wish I had a checklist for you, but the thing about good con artists is you don't see them coming. If you saw them coming, they'd be a used car salesman. You know, they'd be someone who everyone could point to and say, ha, ha, ha. But the great con artists, the ones who manage to pull off a 16-year con, you know, they're people who are friendly and suave and charismatic. They're people you talk to and they're persuasive and you think, oh, wow, you know, I almost believe you. I want to be friends with you if I didn't know who you were. I mean, you even could see in some of the interviews that Barry had with Jose Bergantinos that he has these moments of being so personable and you almost believe him. And then of course, you know, he tries to sell you Dylan's harmonica or whatnot and the cover falls. But actually, I think that makes him a lesser con artist. A lot of con artists would be able to hold back and say, okay, you know what, I'm actually going to be able to keep myself out of this for just a little while longer. And so what I always tell people to do is the single best thing that you can do to protect yourself is actually two things. One is that old journalist adage, trust but verify. You know, don't think everyone is a con artist because that's just a horrible way to go through life, but always verify and always really try to do your homework whenever something's important. And especially do that when you want to believe something. We are very good at verifying whenever we don't want to believe it. And whenever we think that something, you know, whenever it doesn't mesh with the story we want, then we're just experts. You know, will track down everyone who says otherwise and all the disconfirming evidence. But if something meshes with our worldview, with what we already want to be true, all of a sudden, you know, it's the confirmation bias. We just look for things that confirm our opinion and we don't look elsewhere and we think we're being objective. And so the more you want to believe, the more skeptical you have to be. And I always say, try to look at yourself in the third person. Try to say, you know, what would happen if this were happening to, you know, my colleague? If they told me this story, what would I advise them? Would I believe them? Would I say that they need to verify X and Y and Z? If Anne Friedman had been told, oh, your competitor, this woman walked in and there's this treasure trove of Rothkos and Motherwells and all of these previously undiscovered paintings, and they're undervalued and this is insane and we didn't know any of them existed. What would you tell your colleague? Anne would say, oh my God, this person is about to put a lot of fakes on the market. This is great for Knoedler. You know, we can show that we're the gallery with the great experience. This is terrible. But when it happened to her, she did not have that perspective. She thought, oh my God, I have all these wonderful paintings. Yay, I'm going to make my career. So having that third person test is really, really helpful. But most people don't want to do that. And most people don't want to do it when it's something really, really good happening to them. Someone came to me and said, Maria, you are going to win the Pulitzer Prize. And you know why? Because I'm going to give you this amazing story. And it is an amazing story. And I see it and I think, oh my God, I'm going to win the Pulitzer Prize. I should be careful, but I'm going to want to just jump right in and say, oh, this is amazing. My career is made. You know, people will suddenly take me as a serious journalist. It's a really hard impulse to try to kind of step back from and try to say, you know, let's see what's going on here.
Definitely. Patricia, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I guess I have a little bit of a different perspective, and maybe it's more. I'm a little bit more skeptical. I mean, I think that, and I never personally interviewed Glafira Rosales, so I can't really attest to you know, her powers of persuasion, but it seems to me that both of them were kind of mid-level con artists. You know, when this really started. And then there's a long history to this that the documentary didn't get a chance to get into, but there were lesser paintings that turns out came up first. They were talking tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. and again, we have no evidence, we have no proof one way or the other in terms of what actually Knoedler or Anne Friedman knew. But the reality is that they were selling these paintings for tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands to Knoedler, which then in turn, as time went on over 10 years, had jacked up the price on these, the highest one being over $17 million. And, it's one thing if a dealer's making 100% on the, in terms of a markup, but when you start to get to 600%, 700% markup, when Maria was talking about the con man, what makes a good con man, everything she said, it's true, but it's also what makes a good salesperson. And one thing is Anne Friedman, and again, I don't want to get into whether what she knew or she didn't, because I don't know, but she's an excellent saleswoman.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you, Patty. She's a brilliant saleswoman. It wouldn't have worked otherwise. She needed to be.
It's true. It's true.
Completely
Don,
agree
let
with
me
you.
bring you back in here for a minute to talk about the what can the buyer do? I mean, what's the onus these days on the buyer to do their own research and due diligence in a world where perhaps they're not going to get the opinions that they should because people are afraid of legal repercussions? I mean, is this an extreme case of caveat emptor, buyer beware?
Well, buyers always thought that you didn't have to do due diligence with a name gallery. This gallery has been around for 165 years, longer than the Metropolitan Museum. When you go to Tiffany and you buy an engagement ring, you don't then take the diamond to a gemologist and say, is this real? You trust Tiffany. And you trust major galleries. Now, but to follow on what was said before, there was another factor in this. And that is these works were offered at about 60% of what they might have bought at auction. So these buyers were successful, intelligent people who you would expect to do due diligence, right? You never buy a $10 million building without doing a legal search and checking the structure. But people sat down and she said, here's a Rothko and you can have this for $6 million. And immediately you said, that's worth 10 to 15 at auction. I should do my due diligence, but I know that this is a deal. I trust the gallery. If I wait 10 days to get opinions, it'll be gone. So I'll take it right now. So in 45 seconds, you make a buying decision. Or you try and cut $500,000 off it and you buy it. And part of that's greed and part of it's lust and part of it's wanting to get a deal. I offer you a deal, your mental process is different.
The other part of it too, Shane, is that, there's a whole different film on art consultants and the fact that a lot of people who are buying art who have made a lot of money are relying on art consultants who have taught the collectors to buy with their ears instead of their eyes.
Yes.
Right.
I've often said that you should buy art because you love it. And if you're going to start to get into the business of bragging rights and the collection and the power of the collection and the commodity of, boy, you should buy this because this artist is on the rise and this is going to double or triple. And 5 years down the road, this is going to be worth so much more money. This is why you should buy it. Or if it's in the Shane Smith collection, this will get you access to the artist's newer work or get you a better invitation to a gallery opening. And of course, the most powerful people that are buying art today get to see the art before anybody else and get to pick what they want because of how powerful their buying power is. So is that really why we want to buy art today? I mean, that becomes, the huge issue, which was really why at the end of the day, the Southern District in New York really didn't care about wealthy people getting ripped off. They cared about wire fraud and money laundering. But at the end of the day, people that, spent too much money or bought a fake painting, that really didn't motivate them to prosecute this case at all.
Right. That's it. And I mean, the art market has become so overheated in the last decade or more, with record prices being achieved at seemingly every major auction these days. Is the art market just another kind of con, or is it a version of gambling? Like what, or attempted wealth accumulation like the stock market? Is this all going to collapse? Don, why don't you start?
No, it isn't a con, and it isn't gambling. It's what you're seeing today with the New York Stock Exchange and values going up when there's no underlying reason for them to go up, because people don't know where to put money. And that's been true. It's been true since the turn of the century. It's been particularly true since we came out of the recession of 2008, that the museum quality part of the art market is always assumed will go up because there's a finite supply. There's an infinite supply at the bottom, there's an infinite supply in the middle, but there's scarcity at the top. And so if you, a Basquiat sold privately last week for $100 million through Sotheby's private dealing. And the assumption is that that will be worth more. Now, I will tell you that half the art sold by major galleries, by major auction houses, will never again sell at that price, ever. And that's been true as long as they've been measuring prices. So, but the higher you go up into quality art, in museum quality art, the better your chances of it holding its value.
Very true. Very good point. And I guess let's talk a little bit about this moment that we're in and the impact that it's going to potentially have on the art market. And then I'll come to you, Maria, about the opportunity that this is potentially creating for con artists to work their magic on us at this moment in time. Let's start with you, Patty. What impact do you think that this moment is going to have on the art market? And then Don, I'll have you jump in on that as well. Patty.
Well, when you mean this moment, do you mean in terms of just what we're going through economically?
Yeah, the pandemic, the economic impact that it's having. What do you see as the impact on the art market?
I mean, I think Don made a very important point, which is that, at this level of collecting, art has just become another commodity in terms of which is being sold. The other thing that goes along with it is not only investment, but also status. And that's also what a lot of these very wealthy people are buying. Depending on how this recession shakes out, and it's just been formally announced that we actually did enter a recession in February, how short-lived or not, we'll see. There's at that level, there's a kind of universe of buyers. And if there is a dip in the economy, obviously that universe is going to shrink somewhat in terms of people who can afford to pay that amount. But I think it's almost, you have to look at it like in more the way the auction and prices go. It's really more like an investment. And as we know about the stock market, as Don said, it doesn't necessarily reflect real value. I mean, we're really talking about contemporary art, because all of the other old masters and such, those are all spoken for. This is really contemporary art world that we're referring to.
Right.
I think also, Patty, and I don't know if you'd agree, but the level of wealth buying art today, that they'll probably end up buying a lot more of it when there's blood in the streets by art. And I think there's been so much wealth that's transferred hands during this short pandemic, and may it be short, on that end of it, that I think the level of power players out there will continue to buy and drive that market.
Don, did you have anything you want to add, particularly maybe from the perspective of the artists that are trying to make a living or trying to break into this market?
Well, that end of the art market has disappeared. Dealers are all closed. There's no auctions. There's very little private dealing. Artists that used to have dealers are now trying to sell online without much success. And partly because in the middle of a pandemic, people aren't buying. They're not in a buying mood. They're not buying high fashion. They're not buying high art. And one of the questions is, and nobody knows what it's going to be like in 6 months, but one of the questions is, in an environment where you've been locked up for 4 months or 5 months or 6 months, your friends' businesses are bankrupt, retailers are going under all around you, are you going to be in a buying mood to spend $100,000 or 10 million on a work of art as you were a year ago? Not at all clear.
And on that note, in terms of the uncertainty of this moment in time, the pandemic, the economic impact, Maria, what kind of opportunities is this opening up for?
Yeah, it's funny. I'm listening to all of you, and I'm agreeing with everything you're saying, and yet historically we see that con artists flourish in moments like this, in moments of uncertainty, in moments of transition. These are kind of golden opportunities for con artists. And what I would say is, yeah, I agree that people probably aren't in buying moods, but if these are people who fancy themselves savvy investors, and con artists realize this, and they realize that there's all this uncertainty, then all of a sudden, you know, a $6 million Rothko looks like not just a steal, but a very savvy investment. And the con artist will say, look, we know the market is crashing. All of these things are happening, but this painting, this is going to be something that lasts a lifetime. And this is unaffected. And yet you can get it at a cheaper price. And it's not a red flag that it's priced so cheaply, because we're in a pandemic and we're in a recession and all of these bad things are happening. So all of a sudden I have an in. I know someone who has been affected by this, who's, you know, all of his worth is crashing. He was invested, you know, in oil. And all of a sudden, you know, this is the end, and is selling off this precious collection that has never seen the light of day and wants money quickly because you know, all of his wealth is tied up in real estate, and you can do this. You know, we have all of this stuff. Do you want it? And people say yes. And people think, oh, you know, that this is actually a very plausible story. I'm glad I'm not invested in commercial real estate right now. Whew, you know, I'm glad that my wealth is actually still able to be, you know, that I'm still solvent, that I'm still able to make these savvy investments and find these opportunities. Because a lot of people see recessions, they see a situation like right now, and they think, what are distressed assets? What's undervalued? What can I get right now? How can I take advantage of this situation? That's what a lot of smart investors are saying. And if a con artist can say that art is something that's going to be distressed for whatever reason, then they have this golden opportunity for putting some strategic fakes onto the market. Now, I think that they, in the case of the Knoedler art fraud, you know, they overshot themselves. They got a little too overconfident. That was way too many paintings. And that kind of got, you know, that's what a lot of con artists do. That's why they're eventually caught, because they get overconfident. They get away with it for so long, and eventually the story stops making sense because it's just become so huge. You know, you are all of a sudden on Rothko number 60, or you're making up Bob Dylan quotes and you don't really know how you got there. But I think that if you can rein it in, a lot of con artists, I think the best con artists, we don't know who they are. They've never been caught. Their fake paintings are actually still hanging in museums.
Wow.
And you know, Shane, to Don's point about being in the buying mood, I mean, we've seen this historically in the worst economic times, 2008, when major financial institutions were closing and Sotheby's and Christie's were having record days. The famous Damien Hirst collection, hundreds of millions of dollars of art, you know, in one auction, one night auction on that, while the markets were collapsing. So I think there's always going to be people in the buying mood on that end, but we'll see who survives. There's no question a lot of the smaller guys and deal are going to go. The Gagosians of the world continue. They have the Rolodex.
Right. Yes, yeah. They know where to go. They know where to go to make the sale, to keep the business afloat. As we wrap up, Barry, I just want to ask, and Patty, if you have any insight into any updates on the situation, or is this sort of case closed, or is there any sort of dangling threads that still intrigue you about this story?
Well, I don't have any updates. Barry probably knows more about.
I'm constantly intrigued by it. I think that. Oh, go ahead.
No, you're up, Barry.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Am I still there? Okay? Sorry about that. Yeah, I mean, I'm staying in touch with the story and the characters. It always intrigued me that so many of the people that fell prey to this con did not end up suing because they were embarrassed. There were only 10 cases really that were settled, aside from a couple of other things. And so, I still think there'll be ramifications of this art, as some people who don't even realize that they have a fake will come forward. Statute of limitations might not help them at the end of the day. But, I don't think we've heard the last of any of the characters in this film. Certainly not.
Well, we look forward to reading more about them, but also seeing perhaps another film delving into this topic from you, Barry. I want to thank you all so much. Takeaways are: check your provenance of your art. And if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. So thank you for sharing your insights and your advice, Don, Maria, Patty, and Barry. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. You could all mute your microphones. That would be great. Thanks everyone in the audience for joining us for our final Big Ideas session. Thank you and have a great night.